Okay, so we have just started our refined painting layer. And what that looks like on top of our sketch is just that. Let me put, because I'm doing refined painting now, let me put a blank layer underneath everything. And it can help to have a blank white layer. And it can help to have a black layer. And it can help to have a gray layer. But for this one, I'm going to use white. Just so you can see the quality of that new brush that I'm using. Right? And like I said, even though it's a little sharp for watercolor, all it takes is to use the Gaussian blur to take it down just very subtly, about 2.7 pixel radius, and it will look very much like the watercolor we have underneath. Right? Especially with that paper texture coming through. So I'm going to continue to use this. In fact, I might even use, let's see, less of a Gaussian blur at the end of it all. So I'm going to preset that up. Yeah, it's only about 1 pixel basically. So the difference between this, it's a little too sharp, and that, which is just about perfect. And you see how that works with the watercolor composited in from underneath. All right. The other thing we can do is we can take our watercolor copy layer, duplicate it, which makes it a little bit more solid because there's parts of it that are transparent, right? And then sharpen it. So we can do Smart Sharpen. And this is kind of the opposite of Gaussian blur. As long as we don't overdo it, it won't force too many things. It looks for edges. I'm going to try this. And I always do these filters and do these attempts on a background or on a copy so I can see the difference. And you can see kind of the edges where that needs to be fixed with that nose. Things I missed, so I can use my I can paint basically, but I can use my clone stamp to fix them too. These are areas that will need attention in the painting. It's always good to have the navigator open so you can see it from a distance as well. So just like in traditional painting, things can get missed, details can get missed, and you're always trying to work the whole surface as you go. All right. Okay, so on to refined painting now. Yeah, that's a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and lock that as my underpainting. Get rid of this one. I'm trying to keep an economy of layers here. All right, so with my refined painting, I'm going to take my brush. I'm looking at my reference, and I am trying to be bold, squinting a lot, trying to find the edges that matter most, find the shapes that matter. and find the darkest darks. Let's see, I think you want to look at, when you're doing eyes, you want to look at the whites around them in that size, and I'm getting thrown off a little bit by the watercolor that's underneath. This comes in a little bit more too. So I'm using Option a lot to change colors frequently, but I'm stealing all my colors from the watercolors I've already put in. Don't be afraid to mix colors. I'm at a 66% opacity. See the eyebrow. About that, the shadows. So you have to be bold enough, kind of give yourself references. So I have her kind of looking up with that eye and looking down with the other eye. I have to figure out, okay, which one do I want? And the beauty of digital is that I can kind of move these things a little bit. Move elements around just like I was with compositing with the watercolor elements. And then just paint around. I can always erase as well. Let's see, I'm using kind of a nice Payne's gray. Then I can use some of these other shadow tones around it. In watercolor, unlike, acrylic or oil or pastel, which these brushes are kind of, digital brushes do a very good job imitating. Watercolor is a little trickier because of its kind of unpredictable edges. You can do things like wet edges in your brush settings, but that just makes it so that your edges are always darker at the corners where they overlap, and it's just too uniform, in my experience, to be believable for what watercolor actually looks like and actually does. So it's this balance. That's why I wanted to try to do that with this demo, this challenge of trying not to be too controlling. Though, of course, our nature is to try to be pretty controlling when we're painting a portrait. Even though it looks like I'm painting with black, remember in watercolor there really isn't black. They're just mixtures of the different colors. So we've got as dark as I want to go there for her pupils. Play up the shadow in her nostril a little bit, and now start playing with some of these other defining shapes. And then softening around them. Maybe even going to a bigger brush. so that it necessarily is bolder. And maybe going to even a lesser opacity to really help with the blending, what's underneath. Now all the incidental little sharp edges, I'm letting that come from the reference that I've taken, right? So I'm not trying to make it all too uniform. I'm trying to use it where it's useful. And always looking at my navigator to kind of see where I'm going in the right direction and where I'm missing it. And then I can also, of course, turn on my sketch, put it over the top, and it's going to help guide me. So with that, it makes me think that all of this, all of my refined painting can be moved a little bit, so I can kind of warp it into place. Remember, my sketch is the thing that kind of guides everything together. I don't want to get too far from it. At the same time, I don't want to feel really limited by it. I softened my sketch with Gaussian blur, but now I'm actually going to sharpen it again. And by pushing it back and forth in the computer that way, it will make it a more kind of rational mark. And unlike watercolor, because I'm doing it digitally, I can paint with lighter colors. I can do the equivalent of kind of erasing the watercolor. Yeah, actually I like that. Having more of the sketch showing, as long as I brighten it up. So let me go to levels. Let's brighten up the sketch a little bit. Finding the right balance. Okay. And right now, of course, it's going to be very, very helpful. You can even get rid of all the white in the sketch. But you see that makes it too sharp looking. So, all right. That's why I have it on multiply mode. Okay, so continuing to paint. Definitely looking for, these hard edges that I could go back to the watercolor layer and use clone stamp to fix. But I can also try just to kind of paint over them, paint them back and forth. It's kind of an easy way to get my bearings with these brushes and with these watercolor effects I'm aiming for. Again, I'm not at a very high